My fellow Americans.
On March 12, 1933, at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only 8 days after his inauguration, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt communicated directly with the American public. Utilizing an immensely popular and developing technology, radio, he addressed citizens live from the White House to calm fears about the banking crisis and explain actions taken by his administration. FDR's intimate and direct fireside chats broke barriers in presidential communication and set new standards of future mass communication by the Chief Executive Officer of the United States. In the early days of the American Republic, print media was the only way to send information across great distances to the public. While printers vied for new, improved printing press technologies, presidents relied on newspapers to print articles and full-text speeches and waited for Americans to read them. However, a communication barrier remained for the vast majority of citizens who were illiterate and relied on others to have an understanding of current affairs in their country and the world. The 19th century would usher in new technologies to help spread information to a wider audience and connect with their president in a new way. In the late 19th century, Italian inventor Guglielmo Marconi devised a way to use electromagnetic waves discovered by Heinrich Hertz for communication. In 1901, Marconi built a transmitter strong enough to send messages across greater distances. To test this, Marconi sent a single S across the Atlantic Ocean. This revolutionary discovery was the beginning of radio. In 1923, President Calvin Coolidge became the first president to use radio when he broadcast his first annual address, along with a eulogy of his predecessor, Warren Harding. This address was very formal. It was much more akin to the average State of the Union address. By 1929, America was in a comfortable economic place, and humanitarian Herbert Hoover was just inaugurated as the 31st President of the United States. Everything seemed to be going well until October 24th, Black Tuesday. A giant stock market crash crippled the economy. Hoover tried to encourage Americans to remain calm. However, newspapers painted a negative picture of Hoover for the citizens, and they blamed him for the subsequent Great Depression. Years later, in 1932, the Great Depression was taking its toll, as the unemployment rate was at an all-time high. However, an election had just taken place. Former Governor of New York, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, ran against President Hoover. Roosevelt promised the people a new set of government programs to combat the Great Depression called the New Deal. Roosevelt won in a landslide and was inaugurated into office on March 4, 1933. However, Roosevelt had one great problem. Newspapers were still the main way to get messages across to the nation. Unfortunately, the newspaper business was very partisan and created a financial barrier for many. The president was frustrated with the press, as he was a subject of conservative and Red Scare politics, being labeled as a socialist by newspapers such as the Evening Star. As the new president, Roosevelt needed to inform his people on his policies and what he wanted to do with his New Deal campaign. Radio had been a growing enterprise. With radio shows, news, and the fact that almost every single city had a radio station made it accessible to the public. Roosevelt had used the radio before as governor of New York to a wide degree of success, but never in as large of a scale as this. With radio, the barriers of misquotes, changes, or alterations were broken. Roosevelt decided to give his address via radio. On March 12, 1933, at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Roosevelt broke the communication barrier with the public and went on live to inform the people about the banking crisis.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking.
Roosevelt broadcast the speech from the diplomatic reception room of the White House, reading from a black loose-leaf binder. When Roosevelt came on the air, the president's slow and direct form of speaking was easy to understand and accessible by most Americans, since everything seemed so casual as if he was having a normal conversation with each person listening. Before his words traveled across the country, CBS reporter Robert Trout began by saying, "The president wants to come into your home and sit at your fireside for a little fireside chat," coining the infamous term and cementing it in history. Although they seemed to be casual conversations, they were as carefully planned as any speech, taking note of diction, tone, and having each speech go through at least 12 drafts before being sent out over the airwaves. Roosevelt would take careful note of his voice, even getting a removable toothbrush when he noticed whistling from his teeth. The fireside chats were seen as an escape from the harshness of the Great Depression for many Americans. Roosevelt's calm and collected voice helped form an immediate bond between him and the American people. Robert Trout later said, "You felt like he was talking to you. not to 50 million others, but to you personally. The people were so engaged that they wrote letters to the White House, both approving and critical.
Well, what Roosevelt did was he used it as a feedback loop. He would give these speeches and then sit back and see how things happened the next couple of days, the kinds of responses that came in. So they were really, really very important to him because it gave him a sense of how the public was taking to what it was he was saying.
While some praised the president's use of radio, others disliked the president's implications with the new medium. William Randolph Hearst, once one of Roosevelt's biggest supporters, labeled the Fireside Chats as communist propaganda. As Roosevelt's first term came to an end, he was quickly re-elected for a second term in 1936 and a third term in 1940. Roosevelt continued these Fireside Chats over the course of his presidency, with usually 2 a year. They would usually be about the New Deal and how the government programs would function. Roosevelt would use the chats to address his critics and encourage the people of the United States to keep striving for greatness. While most of the Fireside Chats were successful, some were not as well received. The March 9, 1937 Fireside Chat on court packing was about the president's controversial idea to restructure the Supreme Court, or as he called them, the 9 old men, as they were blocking most of his New Deal programs. This Fireside Chat was not received well by fellow politicians or American citizens, and the idea died later on. Then, on December 7, 1941, the Japanese Navy attacked Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, killing over 2,000 Americans. Roosevelt realized this would be the event that would bring America into World War II, signing it as a day of infamy. While he asked Congress to declare war that day, Roosevelt went on the air 2 days after the attack on December 9th. While still speaking in a calm voice, the president encouraged the people to stay strong but prepare to make sacrifices. During the speech, Roosevelt expressed one thing very clearly.
To all newspapers and radio stations, all those who reach the eyes and ears of the American people, I say this: you have a most grave responsibility to the nation now and for the duration of this war.
2 days later, on the 11th, Germany declared war on the United States. The chats became more frequent. While only 20 had been done from 1933 to 1941, 10 were done from 1942 to 1944. Listenership of the chats increased greatly, from an average of 18% of the population during peacetime to 54% during the war. Americans looked to Roosevelt to understand what was happening as the war went on. Roosevelt shifted the topics of the Fireside Chats from then on, from New Deal politics to progress on the war and how it would affect Americans. The president told people how to support the economy, updates in Washington, and even stories of brave soldiers in combat. While newspaper companies still protested, Americans flocked to the radio for Roosevelt's speeches. On June 12, 1944, Roosevelt would go on the air for the 30th Fireside Chat, stressing Americans to buy war bonds and describing progression of the Allied forces in the war. Roosevelt would not give another Fireside Chat during the rest of 1944 or 1945. On April 12, 1945, President Roosevelt died of a brain hemorrhage during his 4th term in office.
Has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead.
After Roosevelt's death, presidents would continue to give addresses by radio continually. As time went on, presidents would take advantage of even newer technologies, such as the television. Television broke barriers further, as with television, people could see their presidents instead of only hearing them. Presidential campaigns would be broadcast on TV, and in 1960, the first presidential debate. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson would hold the first televised State of the Union address. President Jimmy Carter gave his own Fireside Chat during the 1977 energy crisis. Presidents would go on the air to inform their people of major events. Today, presidents such as Barack Obama and Donald Trump can send quick messages to the people with modern social media platforms such as Twitter and Instagram. When Roosevelt aired his first Fireside Chat in 1933, he changed how we see our presidents by breaking barriers and how presidents communicate and interact with their people. As decades have passed, Roosevelt's revolutionary thinking still impacts how we understand and interact with our leaders. While technology has exceeded that of the radio, presidents today are still able to use newer innovations to talk to their citizens thanks to Roosevelt's pioneering.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States has spoken to you from the White House in Washington, D.C.